Hello, everyone. Today we're going to talk about a very interesting topic in Chapter 12. It's called Personality and Individual Differences. Understanding personality is vital as it influences various aspects of our lives, from relationships to personal achievements. In this lecture, I'm going to take a close look at the concept of personality, its measurability, and its potential for stability or change. Without a doubt, personality is an important part of our everyday lives. Falling in love, getting along with your peers or students, and even understanding why we create coping methods to deal with your crazy family over the holidays by imagining you were actually adopted. They all shine a spotlight on personality. But what is personality exactly? Can we measure it? Is it stable or can it change? We'll address these questions and more in this chapter, so let's get started. But before we do, I've got to tell you something. My wife actually asked me to run my jokes by her before I told them to you. I hate doing that because although now she's an insurance agent, she used to be an English teacher and she corrects everything I say. But also, since she was a librarian as well, I started thinking about it and I decided, fine, I'll go ahead and run them by her. And I created a joke specifically for her. Here it goes. A man walks up to a librarian and asks, "Do you have any books for Pavlov's dogs or Schrodinger's cat?" The librarian responds, "It kind of rings a bell, but I'm not sure." She said, "That one's not funny." And I said, "Well, if I'm not funny, you couldn't do any better." And she actually thought for a moment and she said, "Knock, knock." I said, "Who's there?" She said, "To." I said, "To who?" And she said, "No, it's to whom, you idiot. And you call yourself a professor?" I fell right into that one. By reading this chapter and watching the video, you should be able to define the term personality and distinguish it from temperament, self-concept, and self-esteem. Describe how psychoanalytic theories explain personality. Describe what is meant by a personality trait. Understand the concepts of a few well-known and widely used methods and models of personality. Have a better understanding of what's meant by personality type and how it can be measured. You can also describe the results of behavioral genetic studies in regard to the role of genetic and environmental influences on personality. And finally, hopefully you will know what you'll need to do to create a plan to improve your leadership abilities. But first, of course, let's watch a short chapter summary video that I prepared for you.
Hello, and welcome to our summary video on Chapter 12 of Personality and Individual Differences by Dennis Kuhn, John Mitterer, and Tanya Martini. In this chapter, we will delve into the captivating world of personality psychology, exploring the fundamental aspects of what makes each of us uniquely individual. From understanding motivation and emotion to unraveling the intricacies of human behavior, this chapter offers valuable insights into the diverse dimensions of human personality. As we navigate through this summary, we will unravel the core concepts of motivation and emotion, the classification of motives, arousal theory, and the four basic aspects of emotion. Additionally, we will explore the theories and models that underpin our understanding of human emotions and their expression. Join us as we embark on an enlightening journey into the captivating realm of personality and individual differences. Let's begin. We begin with the theories of personality, the blueprints that guide our understanding of human behavior. First, we have Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic theory, a perspective that attributes our thoughts and actions to unconscious motives and conflicts. It's like the iceberg beneath the water, the unseen driving force of our behavior. Next, we delve into Carl Rogers' humanistic theory. This theory posits that humans are innately good and possess a natural drive towards self-actualization or the fulfilling of one's potential. It underscores the importance of a supportive environment in fostering this growth. Finally, we touch on the trait theory, which proposes that personality is made up of a set of traits or characteristic patterns of behavior. Think of them as the building blocks of your personality, each adding its unique touch. These theories, while different in approach, all strive to explain the complexities and nuances of human personality. Moving on to the individual differences, the unique mixtures of qualities that make us who we are. Individual differences are the distinctive blend of traits that make each person unique. These differences are shaped by a variety of factors, including our intelligence, temperament, and personal values. Take intelligence, for instance. It's not just about how well you can solve puzzles or score on a test. It also includes your capacity to understand complex ideas, adapt to new situations, and learn from experience. Meanwhile, temperament reflects our inherent patterns of mood, activity, and emotional responsiveness. Then we have our personal values, the principles we hold dear that guide our decisions and behavior. These values can range from a commitment to honesty and fairness to a desire for achievement and success. Together, these elements combine to form our unique personalities, influencing how we behave and interact with the world around us. Our individual differences, in essence, are a testament to the diversity and richness of human behavior. As we draw to a close, we hope you've gained a deeper understanding of the intricate tapestry that is human personality. The theories and individual differences we've discussed today are not just academic concepts, but tools that can help us navigate our interactions with others. Remember, each personality is unique, rich in its own idiosyncrasies and complexities. As we conclude our exploration of personality and individual differences, we've only scratched the surface of the captivating realm of psychology. Join us in our next video as we venture into the compelling domain of Chapter 12, Health Psychology. In this upcoming chapter, we will unravel the intricate connections between mind and body, exploring the profound impact of psychological factors on our physical well-being. From understanding the influence of behavior on health to delving into the complexities of stress and coping, this next chapter promises to shed light on the holistic nature of human health. Until then, keep exploring.
Okay, on to Unit 1, Theories of Personality. In this unit, you should have a solid understanding of various key concepts and theories related to personality, including psychoanalytic theories that help explain personality, traits, and even disorders that can negatively impact our mental health. Here's a joke. The other day, I went to my therapist and my doctor said that I have narcissistic personality disorder. And I told her, seriously? That's impossible. As the smartest man on the planet, I think I would have noticed. Can you believe my wife didn't even crack a smile at that one? Psychologists define personality as an individual's unique and relatively stable pattern of thinking, emotions, and behavior. It's a reflection of their consistency and uniqueness. It's believed to stem from a person's temperament, evident from birth and influenced by biological predispositions. And of course, a biological predisposition, that refers to an innate ability for humans to act in a certain way that accommodates a particular situation. Something you may want to write down for the weekly quiz. Temperament is a general pattern of attention, arousal, and mood evident from birth. In contrast to personality, self-concept is a subjective appraisal comprising of your ideas, perceptions, and feelings about who you are as a person. It's shaped by daily interactions and involves the new experiences, significantly influencing attention, memory, thinking patterns, behavior, and personal adjustment. Self-esteem refers to a phenomenon of regarding oneself as a worthwhile person. Self-concept plays a crucial role in shaping self-esteem. Positive self-concepts are associated with high self-esteem, fostering confidence and self-respect, while negative self-concepts are linked to low self-esteem, leading to insecurity and self-criticism. So self-concept is the ability to perceive your own personality, while self-esteem is the value you put on your own personality. Psychological scientists have observed that self-esteem can vary across cultures, particularly between individualistic and collectivistic societies. Individualistic cultures is basically, in those cultures like the US, self-esteem is often rooted in personal success and exceptional performance, leading to self-enhancement. Individuals tend to emphasize personal achievements and downplay the faults or failures. Where our collectivistic cultures, like in many Asian cultures, self-esteem is derived as a secure sense of belonging to social groups. People in these cultures engage in self-criticism, focusing on personal improvement for the benefit actually of the group, not the person. Success of the group contributes to the individual members' enhanced self-esteem. And it would probably help if I forward that slide. When we're looking at theories of personality, the study of personality, it really includes various different theories. Each of them offer insights to its emergence and development of personality and also the personality theory. These include psychoanalytic theories, behavioral and learning theories, humanistic theories, and genetic theories, each providing kind of a unique perspective on the nature of personality. For the test, when it comes to accuracy of all the personality theories, everything that we talk about, all of them are actually accurate in regard to one's level of usefulness in describing their own behavior. So I guess it's as accurate as someone believes them to be about themselves. In this section, we're going to actually look in these different theoretical approaches to kind of gain a better understanding of the theory, but also how it relates to our own personalities. So the first is psychoanalytic theory. Originating from the work of Sigmund Freud, you probably heard of Sigmund Freud, provides a foundational understanding of personality dynamics and development. Personality structure is a big part of that. According to Freud, personality, it's actually structured by three mental systems: the id, the ego, and the superego, with each one of them playing a distinct role in shaping behavior. So we all have this, we operate from these different temperaments or our personality. So we all have each one of these. And let me kind of show you how it works. The id that you see on the screen, that's really where our primitive drives come from. And we operate, when we're working from the id, we operate from the pleasure principle. I mean, we're seeking like a young child. We're only looking to satisfy and gratify instinctual urges. We're when we're operating this way, we're very impulsive, irrational. It's entirely, in most cases, unconscious, representing the kind of a primal source of energy within the psyche. So they're unconscious things that we're doing that are driving these impulse behaviors to just go after what we want instead of thinking about and analyzing what we actually need. On the test too, just to realize that, I think there's a test about the reality principle, and that involves delaying action or that pleasure until it's appropriate. So there is something about, he did talk about, it's called the reality principle. Now let's look at the ego. And it's kind of termed the ego, but it's referred to as like the executive function. The ego acts as the decision maker, utilizing problem-solving abilities to manage the id's energies. So our first reaction may be, oh, I want this, but then our ego tells us, hey, wait, let's really think about if this is the right action to take. Is this the right thing to do? And it's really governed by the reality principle. There it says that on the screen now. And it really seeks realistic ways to fulfill the id's desires within the constraints of the external world. What's acceptable and when is it acceptable for me to act or do this thing? And then, of course, we all have what's referred to as a superego. And when we're functioning in this capacity, think of it, a lot of the diagrams like you see on the screen of the angel or a halo above the head, we're functioning and using moral consciousness. Our superego, it acts as the internal, like a regulator guiding behavior and thoughts. An underdeveloped superego may lead to antisocial tendencies, while an overly strict superego can cause inhibition and excessive guilt. So we'll talk more about those as we go along here in the next few slides. The interactions between the id, ego, and the superego are not physical entities, but represent conflicting mental processes that Freud believed that we all had to strike this delicate balance. So we all had part of those, that we may operate. And think about it this way too, just to kind of explain it. You operate one way when you're with your closest friends. You really are who you really are. You don't have these defense mechanisms or these walls put up. So you basically are who you are. So you can be more impulsive without criticism. But when you're with your parents or you're with your boss, you may act in a different way. You may think more about your actions and how those actions are going to be interpreted by the other person. So that's where that ego comes into, where it says, let me think about this. I'm not going to tell the same story that I tell my friends to my parents or to my, to my boss. So that's where that ego comes in. So that ego, it really mediates between the id's instinctual desires and the superego's moral standards. It's right in the middle, and that's usually where most people operate. And it is trying to satisfy both. Freud says the id, the desires, from the moral standard, and it's kind of that intermediary trying to negotiate the right decision to make, and that's what the ego's role is. And your ego is where the defense mechanisms are kind of created. So it's under this pressure of the id and this superego. The ego is trying to reconcile these differences between your own thoughts. Think about the little devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other shoulder, and then in the middle is your head making a decision. Sometimes you create defense mechanisms to kind of manage the anxiety that's caused between those two arguments that you may, or these internal conflicts that you have with your own decision-making process. And these mechanisms, they will cause like repression of the idea or denial of what's going on. They aim to deny, distort, or block out sources of threat and anxiety, serving kind of to protect strategies against stress and threatening events. So you've heard these terms probably before. We talk about defense mechanisms and, all these strategies or coping mechanisms you probably heard about. And that's where this comes from. So when we look at the levels of awareness in psychoanalytic theory, Freud, but also along with most other psychodynamic theorists or people that believe in it, highlight the influence of our unconscious forces. The things that we're not really conscious about, these decisions and why these decisions are made, we're really not conscious or aware of why we actually act the way why we do. So these are unconscious forces on our behavior. And that really is comprised of repressed memories, emotions, of the events that may have happened to us, and these instinctual drives of the id, of what our desires are, or what we want. So there are so many things that are, whether we realize it or not, are causing, whenever a certain event happens, we're going to have a reaction to that event. And we may not be fully aware. It may be subconscious or even unconscious thoughts or things that happened so long ago that we don't even recognize that we are responding in this negative way to an event that happens. And it may not be the person that we're projecting this anger or this resentment or whatever that feeling is, or that action is based on something else and not actually what's truly in front of us. So we have these different levels of consciousness. And you look on the screen there, we've got our unconscious level. That's where we hold repressed memories, emotions, alongside with instinctual drives of the id. And modern research has identified kind of brain circuits and underlying defense mechanisms like repression and the activation of unconscious emotions and memories that are in that unconscious level. And then we look at the conscious level. So you'll see that on the screen or on the slide. And that includes our thoughts, our perceptions about the environment or the situation, our feelings, and our memories that are within our awareness. So these are memories that we are very consciously aware of. That's where that conscious level is. And then we have what's referred to, this was something later that was added to the theory, is a pre-conscious level. And it lies between the unconscious and the conscious. It means that it's there, the memory's there, although we're not really aware of it. But when someone kind of reminds us of it, or we watch an old video or see a picture, that it brings that pre-conscious into our conscious awareness. And that's what a lot of therapists try to do as you go through therapy, or understanding why you're behaving in a certain way or have these adverse reactions to certain events, is to really get down to the root of that cause, to find out in that subconscious or even unconscious awareness, trying to bring that up and remember what that is so you can deal with it and then, of course, move on. Freud, he really insisted that psychoanalytic theory, it places this developmental emphasis on what he called psychosexual stages. And according to Freud, and of course his psychoanalytic theory, personality development is deeply influenced by childhood experiences. We know that. It's particularly in erotic urges. Freud put everything in some kind of sexual fashion, erotic urge, and that's where his interest was. It's also why a lot of his theories aren't really looked at or considered viable today. We'll get into that here in a moment. But he believed that because they happen in our childhood, and he believed those first 2 years were so critical, and once that personality was established, that's kind of it. Unless a major thing happened, you are who you are based on those first 2 years of life. And he believed that. And he said that you'll still have personality developments up all the way until the age of 6, but those first 2 years were critical. And we progress through the series of psychosexual stages, and these stages he has 5 different stages that are on the screen there. And it's the oral stage. You hear about oral fixations. That's where that came from, being fixated if you weren't breastfed long enough or whatever, that you have this fixation, and that causes these, he said, these different things that could happen: anal fixations, phallic, latency, and then genital. So you look at all these things are pretty much sexual, psychosexual stages. Each is characterized by a primary, a different erogenous zone, serving as the main source of pleasure, frustration, and self-expression for the child, or the id, our desires, where all that's coming from. He suggested that unresolved conflicts or fixations in these stages could contribute to the development of various adult personality traits and, of course, maladaptive behavior. And there are really a lot of people, as I mentioned a few moments ago, that really have criticized Freud's work. And even today, a lot of his theories, even though it's a foundation for psychoanalytic theory, and of course that's part of what we do in therapy today, most of his theories in the psychosexual stages are looked at for historical purposes, but and some you can kind of see some of the truth to it. But most people that study it, the critics, say there's really a lack of that empirical evidence, that a lot of his theories are based on case studies or anecdotal evidence rather than scientific research. And there's really a lack of testability to even see if they're valid and reliable. A lot of his theories are difficult to test or falsify, making them really unscientific. And really the biggest reason a lot of people criticized also Freud's work is because when he had someone that, especially women, that said they had been sexually molested as a child, he discredited that and did not use them in the research because he said he didn't believe it. He thought it was made up in their own head because of this fixation about their father or something else, and they're making it up and it never really happened. And of course, that's a very dangerous thing to think and build theories on. So now let's go over to they called neo-Freudians, Carl Jung, and also Alfred Adler and a few other people, Karen Horney, for instance. We're going to look at the different work that really came off psychoanalytic theory and these different kind of alterations of Freud's work. So Freud he was successful in attracting a lot of very notable psychologists and researchers to really study what he had started, and including his daughter Anna Freud and Otto Rank, who further developed his ideas. But there was also what they called after Freudian theories, these neo-Freudian theories. They emphasize culture and social factors and how they develop personality, or they attribute to someone's personality. And of course, the first is Alfred Adler, and then we're going to talk about Karen Horney and Carl Jung. But they made significant contributions to the expansion of psychoanalytic theory. So you see Alfred Adler on the screen. He actually centered his emphasis on social urges over biological instinct. He said, the personality started. This is where we're starting to see that the environment has a lot more to do than these biological instincts, these innate things that we're born with. Our personality isn't just something we're born with. Started looking at did look at urges, but social urges. He proposed the main driving force in personality is really striving for superiority, stemming from feelings of not being superior, for being inferior, leading to a struggle for competence and mastery, that we're trying. That's what Alfred Adler said. We're trying to be the best we can be. And when we're not successful, it results in this inferiority complex, and it's characterized by chronic self-doubt and lack of self-worth. So that's when we first start hearing about self-worth and self-doubt, things like that. And then next we have Karen Horney. While faithful to a lot of Freudian concepts, she really did support a lot of his concepts. The thing that she challenged is more of mechanistic and biological ideas. She rejected the male bias in social norms and argued that a core of basic anxiety originates from feelings of isolation and helplessness in a hostile world. She introduced a concept of moving towards and away from and against others as a way that individuals attempt to control their basic anxiety. So we're trying to control that environment, emphasizing that we need that to have a balance in our emotional health. So we're kind of moving away and in and out of these environments, trying to control that environment in a way that it reduces anxiety and stress. And then, of course, you probably have heard of Carl Jung, but he shared a lot of Freud's interest in the conscious and unconscious mind. He introduced a concept of persona, and a persona is public self. And that he presents and he says how we present our public self to others is not always in balance. So he expanded Freud's view of the unconscious, introducing that our personal unconscious and our collective unconscious is really a deeper kind of place where we store our shared unconscious ideas and images across humanity, leading to the concept of archetypes. Now, when we're looking at kind of current views on psychoanalytic theory, just to let you know, while Freud's theory still remains kind of influential, we're still talking about it, of course, today. A lot of contemporary psychodynamic theorists acknowledge the importance of unconscious processes, but recognize there are a lot of additional motives and cognitive factors that come into play when we're talking about personality and behavior. The influence of the experience on adult personality and the concept of developmental stages, those psychosexual stages that we talked about, some of those concepts are not used exactly, but still are in some form being used today. Just realizing how our personality is really influenced, especially early on in childhood. However, a lot of the specific details of Freud's theory they've kind of been discredited, particularly related to the role of parenting, childhood anxiety, sexuality, and of course the development of women in general. And of course the next group of theories, classification, are called learning theories. So we have, in our learning theory category, we have behavioral personality theories. That's in learning, meaning learning, we learn from our environment. They're developed. They're not biological, not innate, based on innate tendencies that we have for personality, but these are things that we learn over time. And in behavioral personality, it's a collection of learned behavior and patterns that are acquired through various learning processes, such as classical and operant conditioning that we talked about with Pavlov and a few other things that we mentioned, observational learning, reinforcement, extinction, generalization, and discrimination. We've talked about all of those before. Personality structure and dynamics, was referred to by someone named John Dollard. I don't know if we have anyone in Neil Miller in the early theory stages. I don't think we have it on our test, but that is really, it's discussed in the book. It illustrates more behavioral view of personality, emphasizing that learned behavior patterns or habits from the structure of personality they're governed by 4 elements of learning: the drive, cues, response, and reward. So, even though I may not, on the test, may not talk about Dollard or Miller, the structure and dynamics may be referred to. So just know those 4 elements of learning: drive, cue, response, and reward, where cues are really guiding our responses to maximize positive reinforcement. We're looking for things to get that positive reward, positive reinforcement. There's also situational determinants. And learning theorists consider these situational determinants of behavior, acknowledging that environmental cues, they do influence our responses, but this understanding kind of emphasizes that someone's behavior in a specific situation isn't necessarily going to predict their behavior repeatedly in the exact same way, reflecting kind of the impact of environmental cues and differences in that environment. Everything is based specifically on a situation. You're not going to be the exact same, have the same behavior every single time someone calls you a jerk, whatever. It's based on where you are, all the events leading up to it, and so it's really situational. There's also, when we talk about personality and behavior, consistency in behavior is important. While acknowledging kind of the impact on situations on behavior that I just mentioned, personality psychologists also argue, and most of them agree, that true characteristics of our personality manifest consistently across various situations. So we have a relatively consistent personality. And therefore, kind of to attribute a personality trait to an individual, you can do that, and it should be evident that it is going to be the same or similar across situations rather than just isolated instances. So even though your behavior may be different and it could be based on the situation, it's still going to be kind of a consistent in that same environment and same exact situation. So just kind of summarizing, those behavioral personality theorists, they highlight the influence of learned behavior patterns on personality and the role of environmental cues in shaping responses, that's our behavior, while also emphasizing the consistency of true personality traits across diverse situations. And then we expand from learning theories, expanded to what's called social learning theory. And learning theorists, as they're referred to, really expanded a focus to include perception, thinking, expectations, beliefs, goals, emotions, and social relationships. All of this led to the emergence of social learning theory, and it's also called, just like it's also referred to quite often as cognitive behavioralism. So let's look at a few of those concepts of our social learning theory. Julian Rotter's social learning theory, it kind of incorporates three fundamental concepts of the psychological situation, expectancy, and reinforcement value. What we value, we put on that reinforcement or positive reinforcement, emphasizing the influence of cognitive factors of behavior. So when we're cognitive behavior, meaning we're thinking about our behavior and we're going to act based on what we think, what we expect to get. There's also a psychological situation, and of course, I talked about expectancy. The psychological situation, or it's actually how an individual interprets, how you're interpreting that situation, is going to influence your response to any input that you have. Those expectancies and even anticipation of an expected reward or response is really referred to, it goes to a reinforcement. It plays a crucial role in kind of guiding our behavior, and it's based on past experiences. So if we got it in the past and we expect it in the future, then that's going to kind of condition. You see how that's conditioning response theory. It just means that based on what we expect is going to happen, that's what we do. And we did refer to in a previous video or lecture talked about Albert Bandura, his concept of self-efficacy. That's really the belief that your capacity to achieve desired outcomes significantly influences the choices you make and the activities you engage in. So that's the self-fulfilling prophecy. If you think you can do it, you can. If you think you can't, you can't. That's Bandura, his philosophy on self-efficacy. And then, about reinforcement value. That refers to the subjective importance individuals, what we all attach to activities or the rewards, influencing our decisions and behaviors. Social learning theory also introduced the concept of self-reinforcement, where individuals praise or reward themselves for specific responses, which can shape our habits and our personality. And that's actually a technique a lot of psychologists use with clients. Now let's look at personality development and social reinforcement specifically. Learning theorists, unlike Freud, kind of highlight the significance of childhood experiences, rewards, punishment, and frustrations in shaping personality. So it's not just what Freud looked at, these psychosexual stages. Learning theorists look at how the experiences, rewards, punishments, frustrations really shape personality. For your test, you need to know for social reinforcement, it's really based on praise, attention, or approval from others, that significantly influences personality development, including the adoption of socially defined gender roles through identification and imitation. Need to know that for your test. So to wrap up on this slide, observational learning and gender role development, just to kind of add to that, because that is part of one of those questions on the test. Observational learning, it actually allows children to learn by observing and imitating others, especially their parents or people they admire. Gender role development, it's influenced by identification with, of course, again, admired adults and observational learning, where children often you're going to imitate same-sex parents. So there is some part of cultural reinforcement or certain behaviors, such as indirect aggression in girls, how it plays a significant role in shaping gender-specific patterns of behavior. But again, like I discussed in the last lecture, there is no research that has ever proven that, for instance, and this is where a lot of psychologists and theorists back then, 30 years ago, started focusing on, saying that if two gay men, for instance, raise a child, that because of this theory on observational learning and gender role development, believe that child could be influenced to be gay or lesbian. and it's not true. Research after research, and these psychologists that are researchers that wanted to prove that to try to probably stop people from adopting could not prove it. It is not proven. It's still the same number percentage-wise of children that do end up becoming, liking the same sex than the general population. So let's get into humanistic theory. Humanism, it emphasizes the inherent goodness of human nature, rejecting pessimism of the psychoanalytic theory. That's a lot of psychoanalytic theory. It's all kind of a negative type of view of life and personality development. And so this humanistic theory is very it's very mechanistic kind of view of behaviorist theories. It opposes the idea of personality as a battleground of instincts and unconscious forces. Instead, it emphasizes more that individuals are largely the product of our choices. We are comprised of all the choices we made or failed to make along the way. That's what humanism is. You're responsible for that. Humanistic theory, it's also referred to as kind of a third force, and that's really an alternative for psychoanalytic theory and then behavioral approaches. The third one is that humanistic theory that, of course, focuses on human experience, problems, potentials, ideals, presenting, though, more of a positive image on human beings as creatures capable of free will. On the test, I believe that humanistic theory, one of the questions you need to know, it's, those theories are more subjective and personal, while social learning theories often encompass many people and environmental influences and behavior. So humanists, they prioritize immediate subjective experience and private perceptions of reality over prior learning. Hear that again. Humanists prioritize immediate subjective experiences and private perceptions of reality over learning. That is such a big thing to understand. So in other words, it's not objective, it's subjective. It's how we're interpreting data. So our personal perceptions of what the world is or what's going on in our environment is our reality. And that is going to trump what's true, what is reality. Because what we believe to be reality is for us our reality. And that's what the humanistic theory is. It says that our subjective view of the world is unique and that understanding behavior requires awareness of how a person subjectively perceives their reality. So if you were very scared as a child, you didn't have a lot of things, and we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you think about those earlier levels from safety, love, and belonging, but definitely the safety needs that were at the bottom basic of that pyramid. If we don't have that and we go through life scared, we're going to operate from this very high anxiety level. So our baseline anxiety for the fight or flight response can be triggered quickly, and it stays up there. It stays high because we're constantly scared, nervous, and that really affects our decision making, our mental ability to cope and calmness and get rid of stress, anxiety. It's very common with children that were sexually abused as a child, of course. I mean, just a horrible way to start off life because it's the no trust, the fears really do interfere with making good and healthy decisions. Another thing just to know for the test, you may want to write this down. I don't think it's on the slides anywhere, but behaviorist theories, they place a greater emphasis on the external environment and on the effects of conditioning. Again, it's our perspective of the world. That is what humanistic theory is all about. Let's go back into Maslow and self-actualization a little bit and then compare it to Rogers. Those are really two prominent figures when we look at humanistic tradition, Abraham Maslow, Carl Rogers, that really significantly shaped and are still used with humanistic psychology today. So Abraham Maslow, we talked about self-actualizations. His interest in individuals leading exceptionally effective lives led him to study kind of great historical figures, artists, writers, creative individuals, to kind of understand what sets them apart from everyone else. The exploration that kind of led to the concept that he referred to at the top of the pyramid, that self-actualization, which is a process of fully developing personal potentials and continuously seeking personal fulfillment, helping others, living for others. While self-actualization, and remember, it's not a fixed goal, Maslow always emphasized that it required hard work, patience, and commitment. And you can go in and out of actualization. He outlined several ways to initiate your journey or one's journey of self actualization, including being willing to change, accept new information, be open and willing to change, take responsibility of your life for the decisions you make or fail to make. And even though bad things may have happened, it is to evaluate it from a different perspective, take responsibility if there's any, and a lot of times there may not be, but examining, motives for what happened, the behavior, and experiencing honesty, using positive experiences, being prepared to be different, getting involved, and assessing your progress. So kind of if you want to focus or become self-actualized, I hope you do, here are just some of the things that they talk about in the book and that are really a summary of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Again, be willing to change. Continuing to ask yourself, am I living in a way that's deeply satisfying to me and that truly expresses who I am? If not, you have to be prepared to make changes. The next is take responsibility. You become an architect of yourself by acting as if you are personally responsible for every aspect of your life, regardless if something happened that you couldn't have avoided. Try to think about what you could have done possibly to prevent that if possible. Avoid the habit of blaming others for your own shortcomings. That's what a lot of people do. First, look in the mirror and say, yes, okay, this relationship didn't work, and that person may have been really, for the most part, the person that caused this problem, but maybe there was something else that, we could have done to prevent that. We have to take responsibility. Examine our motives. Self-discovery, it kind of involves an element of risk. If your behavior is restricted by a desire for safety or security that I mentioned earlier, and it may take time, but it needs to probably be the time to really test some of these limits, to step out of a comfort zone, realizing that you are not taking enough risk, but in a smart and healthy way, not unnecessary risk. I'm not talking about drinking and driving, something silly like that. I'm talking about in a relationship or trusting a friend, but trying to realize that a lot of these things, the self-discovery, is important, and you take mental notes on the outcome. Experience honestly and directly. One thing that's included in this is wishful thinking. That's another barrier to personal growth. Self-actualization or self-actualizers kind of trust themselves enough to accept all kinds of information without, distorting it to fit their fears and desires or blaming others. They try to see themselves as others do. So that's experience honestly and directly the information that's being received. And use your positive experiences. Maslow considered peak experiences temporary moments of self-actualization. So therefore, you may actively repeat activities that have caused feelings of angst or amazement or renewal, reverence, humility, fulfillment, or joy. And so Maslow considered that when you're at your best, they are temporary moments of self-actualization. It may not be full-time, but that's a positive experience that you want to draw from and grow from. Be prepared to be different. Maslow felt that everyone has potential for greatness, but most fear becoming everything they might become. As part of a personal growth, be prepared to trust your own impulses and feelings. Don't automatically judge yourself by the standards of others. So being different, understanding you have potential for greatness, but at the same time, there may be fear of failure. There may be some other things that are there that can prevent you from taking a risk and trying to be great. But when you do realize that and realize that you're in control of that, your future, and you can do great things, and it's just make sure at first, and it's not in Maslow's theory, it's in my theory, define what great means to you. That's I think the most important to do. What is it that, in a perfect world, in a perfect life, who do you want to become? That's what you have to answer that question before you get into any of this, to know what self-actualization means to you, because everyone may have a different idea of that, of what success means. And then get involved. With a few exceptions, self-actualizers, they tend to have a mission or a calling in life. They feel like they were called to do something. And for these people, work, it's not just done for a paycheck to fill a deficiency need that we talked about with Maslow's, the base needs being deficiency needs, but it's to satisfy higher yearnings for truth, for beauty, community, and meaning in life. Turn your attention to problems outside of yourself. Try to find meaning in your work or meaning in what you do, meaning in your schoolwork now. And that's when you can start realizing your full potential, but also where it starts making sense and gives you that passion and drive to learn. And then, of course, assess your progress. There's no final point at which someone becomes self-actualized. You may go in and out of it. It could be very, very short-term or temporary. And it's important to gauge your progress frequently and renew your efforts, is what Maslow says. If you feel bored at school, at a job, or in a relationship, consider it a challenge and really just ask yourself, have you been taking full responsibility for your own personal growth and development? That's all part of Maslow's self-actualization. So let's look at Carl Rogers. He believed that to further one's self-image from their ideal self, the more anxiety they will feel about their personality. So if you have your image of yourself, and here is your ideal self, and the further that is away from being congruent, being the same, the more anxiety you're going to feel about your personality. And that really goes into, if you've studied in one of the best books I've ever read, The Secret to Happiness by the Dalai Lama. If you've ever, if you like to read, I highly recommend it. But a lot of those philosophies that he teaches, it's not, Buddhism isn't a religion or anything. That's Buddhism is a Western term. A Buddhist belief, it's just a belief and fundamental about life. And one of those fundamentals, of the core fundamentals it teaches, is that our desire to and focus on what we don't have is what causes stress, this unfulfilled need that we're always striving for. Because what ends up happening is then we get it, we no longer strive for it, and we're going to strive for something else we don't have. It's that unfulfilled desire that causes the stress and anxiety. So what they teach you in that Buddhist philosophy is to be in the moment. The present is called present because it's a gift. And if you can learn to understand all the gifts that you have and the blessings, that you could be happy, you have everything you need to be happy. That's where that belief comes from. And Carl Rogers kind of used a little bit of that belief. And he was, a prominent humanist, and he had this self theory. And he emphasized the human capacity for inner peace and happiness, particularly through the concept of a fully functioning person living in harmony with their deepest feelings and impulses. So although I don't know this, if he was motivated or influenced by some of these Buddhist fundamental beliefs, they're very congruent, they're very similar. And central to Rogers' theory is a concept of the self, a flexible and changing perception of personal identity, which influences most of our behavior in an attempt to maintain consistency between that self-image and who we want to be in our actions. So trying to get more of in alignment between ourself and who we want to be. He proposed that our self-image, and that's our subjective perception of our own body and our own personality, of who we are, that influences our experiences, and it gradually changes who we are. So that's where it becomes that self-fulfilling prophecy. Our beliefs and who we are, that's what we become. If you think you're smart, you'll be smart. If you don't, you're going to have a hard time in relationships. You're just thinking that you're not as smart as everyone else, so you're not going to take a chance. And that's what I hope you find out too, by when we went through the Chapter 9 Intelligence, that you realize that you are smart, that you have unlimited ability and capability, and you need to learn how to tap into that, as maybe you haven't been taught that, and that will help you accomplish some great things. So these, again, with Carl Rogers, these incongruent experiences, those are inconsistent with our self-image. That is, it could really be threatening and are often distorted or denied conscious recognition, and it hinders ourself from changing and creating. It creates that gap between ourself and reality. And that's where he emphasized too about authenticity, where our self-image needs to be consistent with our thoughts of who we are, our feelings, our actions, our experiences. How we present ourselves to the world needs to be consistent with who we really are. That will reduce that anxiety and that lack of that self-image, and it creates, instead of that self-doubt, we get the self-esteem. Oh, and I forgot to mention too that, of course, on this slide, as a reminder, that Carl Rogers, according to him, the development of ourself is integral to later personality function. He proposed that children from internal standards, they form these internal standards from evaluation known known as conditions of worth. And that's based on the positive or negative evaluations of other people on ourselves. So children learn which actions kind of elicit love and approval and attention, and the ones that are rejected, while also internalizing parental labels of certain feelings of what's right and wrong or bad or wrong. So he emphasized that optimal development occurs when individuals receive unconditional positive regard, which entails complete acceptance of who we are without any strings attached. This in turn kind of leads to the capacity for self-esteem, positive self-evaluation, and positive self-regard in life. So, the concept of conditions of worth is important to understand because it refers to the internal standards, our own standards used to determine the value of our thoughts, our actions, feelings, and or experiences. That's what the concept of conditions of worth is all about. So let's go to Unit 2, the building blocks of personality. In this unit, we're going to discuss what's meant by personality type, the weaknesses associated with this approach to classifying personality. And as I mentioned before, understanding personality, it's an extremely complex, thing to kind of crack. And when things go wrong, it can drastically affect our mental health and overall quality of life. In these cases, it's recommended, of course, we seek the help of a professional to work through the issues. And I truly believe everyone should do that. And if you do, choosing the right therapist is an essential step in the process. With that said, going on the joke I said earlier about my psychiatrist, I failed to mention that when I went to the psychologist the other day, I really didn't want to discuss my feelings and problems with my childhood. All I wanted to do was get a refill of my ADHD medication. Just after she made that remark about narcissism, she said as she was leaving, and you probably have split personality too, and gave me a check for $160. Man, I was so mad. I just looked at her. I handed her $80 and I told her, well, here's 80. You can get the other from the other idiot. That's a joke, of course. I didn't go to a therapist and I didn't do that. I do have ADHD. I guess if I have to tell you it was a joke, it probably wasn't a very good joke. And my wife would agree with that. So let's look at trait approach and traits. A trait approach, is currently kind of a dominant approach to studying personality. Most people are looking at the traits, not the personality as a whole, but the different traits that can really identify personality type. A personality trait, that refers to differences among individuals in their thoughts, feelings, and behavior that are relatively, again, like personality, they're stable over a variety of situations and through a fairly long period of time, even a lifetime. So there are this set of trait theorists that seek to describe personality with a small number of key traits or factors. So of all these hundreds, if not thousands of traits you can identify, they try to break it down into smaller groups. And there are at least two reasons why it's an important area of study. The first is examining traits. It kind of helps us make sense of individual differences, why we're different as people, and why do we show our diversity with respect to cognition or emotion, behavior. And the second reason is that, a good understanding of our traits can really be helpful in predicting how people are going to react in a particular circumstance. In the book, they talk about someone named Daryl, and they said that Daryl was talking in an animated way to strangers, first at a supermarket, later at a party. You may infer or assume that he is sociable. Noting this about Daryl will allow you to comfortably predict that if you took him home to meet your family at Thanksgiving, you wouldn't have to worry about him feeling uncomfortable around your family and sitting alone in the corner. This kind of predictive power extends to other more significant life outcomes too. For example, certain traits can be used to predict health-related behaviors as well as marital and occupational success. So it's kind of the example in the book. So we look at traits and situational influence. A personality trait, and this is important to understand, write this down, it refers to a stable quality that a person shows in most situations. So traits are the consistent qualities that really typify an individual's behavior, such as being friendly, optimistic, or cautious, even if there are occasional deviations from these traits. So there's trait situation interactions, and think about what that would mean, trait situation. In these type of situations, these interactions, external circumstances, our environment, they influence the expression of our personality traits, causing us to adjust our behavior based on that situation. So we have a trait and it's situation based. Our response could be different based on a situation, but it is relatively consistent when that situation is the same. And so that behavior can vary across different settings, but individual settings on a particular trait relative to others, it's likely to remain consistent. In extreme and prolonged situations, it's an important note here that, like living in a dangerous neighborhood or experiencing, years of abuse or neglect, situational influences may override an individual's natural traits, leading to behavioral adaptations focused on immediate concerns for safety and self-preservation. However, over the long term, traits are generally considered, again, to be good predictors of an individual's behavior. So when we try to we're talking about classifying traits. We want to look at different categories. And those categories are based on their interrelationships to kind of simplify our comprehension and understanding of individual differences. So when we're talking about someone that is a type A or type B, we talk about it so much, you already know what type A behavior is. That's kind of what we're looking at. So there's central and there are secondary traits. There's two different types of traits there. And Gordon Allport is listed on there. He distinguished between these central traits, which are really fundamental. The central are fundamental building blocks of personality. And those secondary traits are more superficial personal qualities, such as food preferences, our attitudes, and our taste for music. It was the example in the book. So central traits, again, they capture the essence of a person's personality, while secondary traits are more circumstantial. And then there's something called source traits. And this is where we get into, you're not going to get much into the Raymond Cattell's theory, but he did have a theory, and you're looking on the screen a little bit at it. I think that's the example of it. And it identified source traits, and there were 16 of them, that he considered to be the core of an individual's personality. He observed that certain observable traits frequently clustered together, representing a single, more fundamental traits. And that's how he narrowed them down from, maybe 200 or whatever, down to the 16. And so he clustered them together, representing a single and more fundamental trait. These deeper characteristics or dimensions are referred to as source traits or factors, providing a more fundamental understanding of an individual's personality. So when talking about source trait, it's really a group of traits that are similar. So just think of it that way. So source traits, as identified by Cattell, they differ from Allport's central traits in that they are determined through a more objective statistical technique called factor analysis. Of course, we talk about different factors, analyzing the ones that are similar and grouping them together. That method, it correlates multiple measures to identify general underlying factors, providing a more empirical approach to understanding the connection among traits. So remember correlation. When we do statistical analysis, we're looking if something is correlated. We have we have positive one, negative one correlation with zero. If it's zero, the factor analysis show there's zero. There's no correlation between these two factors. So we're looking for high, either positive or negative correlation. And the ones that we see, these extreme high and low correlations, grouping those together and putting them into these source traits is kind of what it's how it's done. And that's through factor analysis. And factor analysis also revealed the kind of imaginative people consistently. This is kind of an example. They exhibit traits such as inventiveness was one thing, originality, curiosity, creativity, innovation, ingenuity. Those are really very similar words. And when it comes to personality, they have the same kind of response. So since they were very highly correlated, then they put them in the one classification called imagination or imaginative as a source trait or factor representing a fundamental dimension of personality. So in the context of trait theories, factor analysis, again, another for the test, refers to the statistical technique used to correlate multiple measures and identify general underlying factors to create that source trait. And then there was a little bit on the screen, it shows Han Eysenck. He has a trait theory that it's one of the first personality trait theories, actually, and it was composed of two separate factors. That's where you get the introversion, extroversion from, too, not just type A and type B. Now we're talking about introversion, extroversion, and emotionally stable or unstable. So those were the core these two different factors, and it illustrates the use of source traits to define kind of core dimensions of personality. So trait theories are really just attempting to describe personality with a small number of key attributes or factors. And then, of course, one that I like the best is called the 5-factor model, the Big Five. And that's one approach. And then after the Big Five, we'll talk about another one of these big, really popular ways to classify these different approaches for traits is called the hexaco model. But and these are really more recent because the psychologists really focus on simplifying kind of the identification of these key factors in underlying personality. And that's what led to the development of these models. And both are really aiming to capture most individual differences in personality with as few number of traits as possible. So the Big Five, as it basically says, 5, it aims to condense. Even Cattell, I mentioned earlier, he has a 16-factor personality questionnaire, a personality factor questionnaire. So it took those 16 from Cattell, and it actually brought those down to just 5 source traits or dimensions of personality, they refer it to: extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, neuroticism, and openness to experience. And that neuroticism is now called negative emotionality, but it used to be called, when it first created, neuroticism. These factors are really used to informally rate individuals' personalities based on their level of extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, neuroticism, and openness to experience. And I'm going to just neuroticism. A lot of people, I don't know why, but they think of the narcissism. It's not neuroticism. So they put this negative connotation on it because narcissism is very negative, thinking that someone, like my joke at the beginning, the smartest person in the world, the only person in the world that matters. Neuroticism is not that. Neuroticism is just meaning you worry, that you're always thinking about something. And a lot of very highly intellectual people are high in neuroticism because they're constantly in their mind reconciling potential for threats that could happen, realizing that, I was in the insurance business, that you're going to have if you have a wreck, 72% of the time, you're going to be within that 2 miles from your home. And so I'm always thinking statistically, and that could look at, even though I'm not high in neuroticism, but it could be looked at in that particular instance, highly neurotic. So let's look at this Big Five a little bit differently. And what I'd like to do, I'm going to show you the Big Five, and this is a theory that I'm currently researching and adding. That's why you see the Ivy Consulting Group logo in my company, that taking this 5-factor personality theory and taking all of these proven, scientifically researched and backed fundamental concepts of personality, these 5 different different parts of personality, and relating it to a work environment is what I'm doing. But here's a few things just to know about the 5 different factors that McCrae and Costa is one. They created it back in the mid 80s, and it's been revised several times since then. But for extroversion, if you look at some of these, you can easily rate how introverted or extroverted. That's the easiest one to do in the middle. Agreeableness, if you see the one that's green there, that refers to how friendly, nurturant, and caring a person is, as opposed to someone that's cold, indifferent, self-centered, spiteful. Agreeable people often, they put the interest of family even ahead of their own, or other people ahead of their own. That's one negative thing about agreeableness. They're not taking care of themselves. They're just wanting to please that other person. And then there's conscientiousness. That's really a self-disciplined person who's responsible. They're focused on achieving, being part of a team. We talk about work, or wanting to be conscientious about the environment or about other people around them. People that rank low on this factor, though, they're very irresponsible. They're careless, undependable, unreliable. And then we look at the neuroticism that I explained earlier, which is now called negative emotionality. That refers to being negative about the views of the world, upsetting emotions, worrying. People that are high in neuroticism, they tend to be very anxious, emotionally kind of sour, negative people, irritable, unhappy most of the time. And then finally, we look at that openness. People that rate high in openness, they're open to new experiences. They have an open mind. They're creative, and they love new ideas. So they are great listeners. So that's kind of the 5 different factors, called the 5-factor model, or the Big Five. That is probably it's the most used today, and it is very scientifically and research supported. The other one is the hexaco model, and they call it a 6th dimension of personality. recent research, and there's 6 things here as opposed to 5, but and they revealed, in addition to those 5, a 6th dimension of personality known as honesty and humility. That's what it's adding to the big 5. And they started with they did the original research in Korea, then they moved over to European countries as well, and they found that honesty and humility is a factor that's not really being considered in the big 5. And it really represents more of an extension of the big 5 with that 6th dimension. So it is a more comprehensive framework for understanding human personality traits, but across different cultures. That's really when the reason they looked at it in Korea, that's looking at these cultural differences, it was really different, significant in that model. But let's look at, one part in the book, you talk about few factors, many personalities, that even though we're grouping these together, it doesn't mean that we're just reducing personality to 5 or 6 factors. It means that there are different dimensions with each one of these factors. So whenever there are questions, like in the hexagon model, you can have a multitude of different sub factors that are going to generate a different response based on the questions. So it's not just someone is an extrovert, someone is an introvert. It doesn't mean it that way. There are variations. And while some researchers, when we look at a trait score, there is not a certain score that says it's better than another score. There's not one best single personality pattern that can say this person is better than the other person. All of them have different advantages and disadvantages. For example, like extroversion, that, an extroverted person, they may earn more and have more social partners. They may earn more because they're more social. And a lot of sales jobs pay more, but they're also more likely to take risks, to experience divorce. I mean, so there's also, when you're looking at good and a negative part, so there's the extremities, those extreme ends of these things where you find a lot of these changes where it can be too much. Also, like if you look at agreeableness, and a lot of people that are high in agreeableness, they attract more friends, but they also may prioritize the friend's interest over their own, and it really can potentially put themselves in kind of disadvantage in a lot of situations. And then you look at conscientiousness, which most personality traits or things that employers look for, they want people high in conscientiousness because they have teams and they want people that care about the company, care about the team value, care about their work. And that is really associated of all the other factors. It has got the highest association with success or high achievement, but too much of it can lead to perfectionism, which beyond a certain point can be very maladaptive. And I think you get the point. So what's the difference between, again, personality trait and personality type? So when we discuss personality types, that's referring to individuals who share common traits. We're all this type. There are informal types such as the executive type or the athletic type, and often based on there's a unique collection of traits. But here's something to be very cautious about. There are what's called a 4-quadrant personality test or assessment, like the Myers-Briggs on the screen. And that's the most popular one out there. But I can tell you, it is not statistically valid. It is not something that's reliable. And of course, remember, reliability means that you can take it over and over and get the same result. You personally are going to get the same MBTI. Well, take it now, take it again at a different job or a different age. You're going to get a totally different one of those different scores. And so it's not really a personality assessment. It's more of a preference, your preferences. But it is a great conversation piece, and it is the most popular test on the planet. Unfortunately, there are companies, and you could look it up online if you want to find some very interesting case studies about companies that have used this for hiring and how wrong it is. There are companies that still use it today, which is shocking, but should never be used for a recruiting, promotions, things like that. It should be used more of a conversation piece to help people become happy at work. And when they're happier at work, they're more engaged. So it's a conversation about something, or used for psychotherapy to really get to understand what people like, what their strengths, weaknesses are, and how they view themselves in a situation. But there's a strength of those. Again, self-awareness. Have you ever taken a personality test? Do you think good self-awareness of who you are? And if so, if you took a test, did it really reflect accurately on who you thought you were. I do want to offer you something. I do have on my website. I can tell you it's ivconsultinggroup.org. You can see at the bottom. Let me kind of make it bigger here for you just so you can see it. You can create an account by using that link below. Just key it into your browser. And after you do that, email me. Let me know you did it. I have to approve the account. And then you can take an assessment, the 5-factor, and I will send results to you. I've got to actually, as a consultant for the company, it's not something you just take and then get it, because it's emailed to your consultant, which would be me, and I will print the report out and send it to you. But if you would like to know more about that, you can take it on the website for free. It's up to you. So during previous lessons, we discussed different experiments, like classical conditioning experiment with Ivan Pavlov and his dog that I'm sure you remember. And in this unit, we're going to discuss how measuring personality can help predict how people will behave at work, school, and even a client in therapy. However, our brain and our behavior, again, it's very complex, and it is hard to really, you can't paint a perfectly detailed picture of that and how to assess it. That's a very big challenge, to say the least. And psychologists use a bunch of different methods to assess personality. Each have some strengths and weaknesses. And for this reason, they use a combination of tests or assessments. And just to let you know, a test, assessment, analysis, a lot of those, it's the same thing, just use different words. And what we're going to do in this section is kind of look at several of those. We're going to look at what an interview is, observation, personality inventory, and a projective test, which is new, very interesting test that I'd like to talk about. But before that, I've got to tell you, I heard one day when Ivan Pavlov, he was in the U.S. and, when he first came over here, he's from Russia, but he spoke, I forgot how many languages, Russian, German. He could barely speak English, though. He walked into a bar, and the only drink he could speak in English and say or pronounce was a martini. So he asked for a martini, and he said it with a weird accent. The bartender looked at him and kind of puzzled, but he said, "Dry?" Pavlov looked at him and said, "Nah, just one." I guess if you don't know German, dry actually means 3. 9 means no. Dieser Witz stinket. That means a joke probably stinks. Anyway, move on. Assessing personality and through interviews and direct observation. Let's look at that. So an interview is a direct questioning. It's used to gather information about a person's life history, their personality traits, even their current mental state. And there are two different types of interviews. There's an unstructured interview and a structured interview. The unstructured interview, you think of it where you ask informal conversations. They're open-ended, where you want them to describe or explain a situation, and you're taking notes. So those very unstructured, and you kind of let the interview flow with where the person is leading you. Where structured interviews, they follow a very, very planned series of questions. And they're usually used in various contexts, such as like a job, college selection, studying personality dynamics, when we're doing research, doing counseling, therapy. Because what we want to do is we want to know, because having these closed-in questions, yes or no, or different kind of things, makes the results easier to interpret and to classify. And after you've classified them using these validated methods for observation or personality evaluations, then we can kind of group it and then understand what we're working with and start analyzing or predicting behavior. So, you're going to see that unstructured interviews are used more for therapy, couch therapy, psychoanalytic theory. But the structured interview, definitely when we're doing research, things like that, we need closed-in structured questions. There's a problem with a lot of these tests too, called the halo effect. And that's a tendency to kind of generalize favorable or unfavorable impressions to, say, entire personality. An example is like if you have someone that you really admire, a celebrity, for instance, and you think they're amazing, they seem so nice and they're great, and you go to meet them and you find out they're just kind of a jerk. You had this halo effect because you thought someone was a certain way, and you think how this applies to psychology, and you apply it like in an interview, for instance, when it's a job interview. If you see someone and they look like someone you think could be nice and trustworthy, your mind can play tricks on you, and you trust them, you like them, and they could be the worst person on the planet. That's what that halo effect is. And opposite is true too. You may look at them and think they're mischievous, they're not trustworthy, and they could be the best person on the planet. So it's important that you understand how your own bias and interpretation could negatively impact your decision-making process. And then we're measuring personality through direct observation. And that's, if you think about it, direct observation, a lot of times you probably have sat in an airport and watched people go by and thinking who they are, what are they saying, in airports, in public places. Many people, a lot of people love to do that and just to see how people act and interact with one another. But when we're talking about sort of assessment, this is watching someone in their natural environment and writing down their actions, reactions, and their mannerisms and how they're responding. And that's kind of a direct observation. And a lot of psychologists can arrange like an observation, especially in child psychology, is put them in, let them play with toys, things like that. Let them play with other children, see how they're interacting, and make observations, take notes. Are they aggressive? Are they very timid? And that careful observation, they can really look and see and kind of get down to maybe the root of the problems. But unfortunately, like direct observation, there's some limitations too. You have to realize that, of course, talked about our misperceptions or our biases that really can interfere with our observation and negatively impact this observation, not being so objective because we're being too subjective with our own experiences, biases, and prejudices. And so for this reason, there are alternative forms of observation that have been developed, and we're going to look at two of those now. They're rating scales and situational testing. So the rating scale, and note too, rating scales and behavioral assessments that we're going to talk about too here first. There are two types of personality assessments. They're essentially alternative versions of the same test, that lists certain traits or aspects of behavior and a person's graded. So we kind of group them into one category. So a rating scale, it's a list of personality traits or behavioral aspects used to evaluate the person during an observation. So you have specific things you're looking for, and it helps you ensure that all the traits are considered and it prevents the exaggeration of certain traits by the observers. It's trying to limit that subjective analysis or view of that person. Then we look at behavioral assessments. This involves counting the frequency of specific behaviors rather than inferring traits, counting how many times, record the frequency of their aggression or their self-care, their speech, their unusual behavior. Behavioral assessments also kind of probe thought processes, reveal how individuals react in certain situations, such as like the study when you do couples therapy discussing sexuality or lack of communication, those kind of things they do with a behavioral situation. Situational tests simulate real-life conditions to observe a person's spontaneous reactions, aiming to reveal their personality characteristics. The tests expose individuals' conditions like frustration, temptation, pressure, boredom. And for your test, know that situational tests or assessments, they differ most significantly from a rating scale assessment by exposing people to actual conditions rather than describing them. So this is just a sample rating scale. You can look at it, and kind of see. So it's a 5-point rating scale where you're asked a question, and if you take the 5-factor, you'll see it very low or very like me, not like me at all, to whatever, and the different differences. So it's just the Likert type 5 or 7 usually potential answers. The personality inventory, an objective assessment. These are also known as questionnaires, like the one you just saw. Paper and pencil tests are in the past. Now, of course, they're mechanized. They're designed to reveal personality characteristics in a standardized and objective manner. And that's what I like about the computerized testing, and with AI and all these the advancements are incredible. And a lot of older people that don't understand the technology are scared of it. But what I like, it takes that subjectivity out of the rating mechanism, and it just has to be objective. And these tests are going to provide more objectivity, of course, compared to interviews or direct observation. It takes the bias out of them, and it's going to yield the same score when taken by different people. That's the advantage. So a good personality test must have reliability, again, that's yielding, and have the same scores over time, and then be valid. They have to accurately measure the traits that was designed to assess. And additionally, you'll see there on the screen it says norms. Extensive norms are kind of used to compare that person to a general population. So if you remember the bell-shaped curve, and you have the middle group, and then you have the outliers, and you're compared to that middle group. And those are what norms are called. And it's a statistical method for the measurement of personality and the test reliability and validity. You know, when I will get into ink blot tests now, you kind of see them there. You probably heard of a Rorschach ink blot test. You know, the first time I saw them, I thought to myself, who's Rorschach? Who's this Rorschach guy? And why does he keep painting pictures of my parents fighting? That's a joke. Maybe you'll understand it once you hear what the Rorschach test is. But a projective test. It's going to show you some images. Rorschach started out with 10. Brilliant person. He actually died when he was very early. Interesting story that his test, though, was very highly valid, highly reliable. And it's not just a normal test for normal personality. It's looking more for the abnormalities, the disorders that in, you know, people that have been raped, molested, other kind of things. They're going to see images in a certain way where a normal person will say, I see a butterfly. Another person would see something completely different. So Rorschach died when he was very young. He did not have the opportunity to fully document how all of these were being used, how all the certain parts of this ink blot and how it was used to interpret personality disorder. So, but because it really took off, people loved it. Then you've got non-licensed people trying to do this because they found it so fascinating and what it actually showed that it really screwed up with the validity and reliability of the test because just anybody started doing it. And there are only a few people actually I know that are certified to do it. And it is a fascinating world to understand what people see and how that relates to personality and gets them to open up more about maybe childhood experiences or things that are very, very difficult to talk about. So a projective test, it involves kind of describing ambiguous or unstructured stimuli like the ink blots, and it allows that individual to kind of organize what they see based on their own life experiences, and that reveals insight into their personality and how it's been shaped by these experiences. There's no right or wrong answer, so it makes it very difficult to fake, and they really provide, though, a rich source of kind of information instead of just these objective true or false or this is like me or not like me questions. These are really open-ended questions that they really describe what they're seeing. And so what we're looking for in this is looking for the descriptive words and finding out a little bit more about that. And the two most important, or the two most popular projective tests, of course, are the Rorschach ink blot test. And it is, again, not being used very much, but there's also a thematic apperception test that we'll look at here now. But just know, too, these were around the 1920s, 10 standardized, but now there's probably 50, 60 of them that people create to say they know what they're doing and kind of use it. But there are only 10 cards. And then we're going to now look at the thematic apperception test. This was developed by Henry Murray, and it's 20 different sketches. These are old sketches of life situations back then. I have tried to update this and put it in a work environment, and I'm showing some high reliability in it. But during testing, the individuals are kind of asked to make up stories about what they see. There's some really scary ones. If you see this picture, think about what you see there. Who is the lady in the back? What happened? What are you seeing with this person? And so psychologists try to interpret, after the person tells them what they see in the picture, they're going to interpret that message and analyze that content of the story to understand that person's feelings, their interactions, and try to find out what led up to this event and find out what that person believes. So on the test, just know that the thematic apperception test, it's called a TAT, it's particularly effective at revealing feelings about social situations and relationships. It kind of provides insights into major conflicts, and you set therapy goals. So it's used a lot in psychoanalytic theory. And so it is revealing relationships about feelings about social situations. So there's always more than one person usually in these, and it's about what that social interaction is. There's some limitations to projective testing in terms of validity and objectivity and reliability too. And it's mainly due, of course, to the difficulty in evaluating, interpreting these results because they're so broad. No one says the exact same thing. And they're still considered very valued by clinicians, especially if they use part of a whole battery of tests. Usually they've gone through a bunch of other ones. Now they want to dig down deeper into it. Someone that's certified and licensed may decide to use one of these tests to dig a little deeper, especially when someone's not giving them information freely. And also know the Rorschach test, that reveals more details about how a person perceives the world, where the thematic apperception test reveals more about how the person sees the social environment or their relationships. Like many other human characteristics, personality is really influenced, of course, by genes and the environment. However, personality theorists have long kind of argued and grappled with the relative contributions of what nature and nurture. So we've got nature, are what we're born with, and nurture, our environment, and how that shapes our personalities. Some approaches, such as like trait theory and psychoanalytic theory, they stress the role of inherited biological predispositions that we talked about, whereas others, like including the humanist theories we talked about and behavioral therapies, stress the role in learning and life experiences. I didn't tell you that, to kind of finish the story about Pavlov when he went into that bar and misunderstood what that person was saying. What I didn't tell you was when he walked into that bar, the reason they went into it, he had just heard for the fourth time he had been turned down for the Nobel Prize of Physiology. And it's true. He was declined. He never won it. He was turned down 4 times. So after a few martinis, all of a sudden he's in the bar and just feeling really good. And all of a sudden the phone rang really loud and it startled him, is what the story goes. And he stood up and he started stumbling. He started muttering, "Ah, crap, I forgot to feed my dog." Is that one funny? I think that one's funny. But anyway, let's go ahead and go on to the next one. So the effects of nature and nurture on personality. Again, behavioral genetics, that's a study of inherited behavior traits. Intelligence, language, and some psychological disorders are influenced by heredity. We already discussed that. And we also discussed the studying of identical twins that grew up in different homes. And they found that the reunited twins are very much alike when even they're raised in different places. But it's not always the case. Personality is unique blend, and that's where they can really study more about with these identical twins raised in different environments between nature and nurture. And if you remember, we talked about before all the percentages. So just a self-assessment, just think about yourself and how your personality has rolled and your own hypothesis. Do you think you're affected more by your nature or your nurture in shaping your personality? Another thing to kind of talk about there, when you took the test on intelligence, and a few of you in the comments on the discussion board and some of the answers questions may have been missed, I want to make sure that understand that our personality, but also our intelligence. And remember, there's not just one type of intelligence. There are a lot of different intelligence, and they can be impacted by the environment. That's through your teacher, your school, the access to different things, studying, so you can, and this is such an important part about your personality and intelligence. You're not biologically predisposed to be who you are. That does impact it, but your environment, while some of that environment may not be perfectly controlled, you can control your environment, especially as you're older. And who you marry, where you live, how you raise your children, all of these decisions that you make have a major impact on who you become and who you are and how your personality develops, how your intelligence develops. And for you to ever think, and it doesn't matter if you're how religious or your beliefs or anything like that, but of course I do believe and have faith. But when people say that's God's will, I always wonder, that's kind of pushing off responsibility. And I don't look at it the same way. I look at it as God gives us a mind and choices to make, and we can either make the right choices, wrong choices. We've got to take ownership of that it's not, God's will. There are some things outside of our control. That's the only way that can be maybe explained. But the point is that when you don't believe that you're able to influence and affect your own life, your own success, then you become hopeless, and it becomes a really tough and difficult life. So I hope that you understand that you can impact that. You going to class, paying attention in these videos, in the test, understanding how it can apply to your own life can make a dramatic impact on who you become. So one more joke, if that's okay. We're going to talk about leadership. So I wanted to kind of give you kind of a fable, if you will. A crow is actually sitting high up on this tree, just kind of doing nothing all day like crows do, nothing. And this small rabbit's hopping around eating, looks up at the crow, and he asks the crow, "Hey, can I sit like you and do nothing all day long too?" Kind of sarcastically. And the crow looked at him and said, "Sure, why not?" So the rabbit kind of decided, I'll do that too, and kind of sat on the ground, didn't do anything all day. And then all of a sudden, this fox was behind a tree, jumps on the rabbit and ate it. So kind of the moral of the story is, to be sitting and doing nothing all day, you have to be sitting very, very high. Probably not a good example, but when we talk about leadership, there are a lot of expectations on leadership, and that's what we're going to kind of discuss. So, when we're looking at it too, there are two big questions of the universe. The number one is, what is the meaning of life? And the second, probably on that list, or, if you search it on Google, how many times leadership is viewed, or the stuff that's about leadership, the question is, are leaders born or are they made? And that's kind of what we're going to talk about. So understanding leadership, early research on leadership kind of focused on the personality traits of successful leaders. And matter of fact, early research, I remember seeing a study many years ago saying that if your middle toe is longer than your big toe, that you're going to be a good leader, which is kind of funny. Not true. So don't look at your feet. But assuming that certain traits are inherited, and there are certain traits that can be more inherited, can affect your leadership. But the traits like self-confidence, your intelligence, extroversion, persistence, responsibility, sociability, cooperativeness, your emotional intelligence, they're all considered crucial for effective leadership and are affected by the environment, majorly affected by the environment. So there's been a lot of evolution in leadership research, especially over the last 30 years or so. While a lot of these early theories viewed leadership traits as inborn, something that you can't just hire someone to be a great leader, more recent studies really shifted towards perceiving traits as relatively stable, again, learned behavior patterns, aligning with the behavioral approach to leadership. So that approach emphasizes kind of leadership behaviors, how the influence on the environment or your circumstances and the potential for learning leadership skills is necessary. So there's a behavioral approach that you see on the screen to leadership, and that is that it assesses the actual behaviors of successful leaders. So this approach to understanding and research on leadership, it focuses on two key areas. The first thing is looking at leaders and effective leaders, their task management and people management. Task management involves, of course, time management, defining responsibilities and appropriate delegation, while people management involves really around building trust, respect, and rapport with the team. So there's leadership too, and defining leadership can be defined different ways, different cultures, but research has to delve into how various leadership characteristics are more or less effective in different cultures also, or organizational settings, because they can be quite different, highlighting the influence on of leadership, the environment on leadership behaviors in a given situation or a different culture, and they can be different. So if we're teaching leadership, if you're a consultant or business coach or boss, the behavioral approaches actually suggest that leadership skills, they can be learned, and it kind of offers you the possibility of how to develop and identify appropriate skills for different leadership situations. Thereby, it kind of enhances that individual's leadership ability and their potential for success. So it's not just that anyone can be a leader at any time. They can, but you as let's say a mentor, you're trying to develop yourself, you've got to know exactly what those skills that you really need to focus on. And a lot of those skills, the number one thing is communication. So I wish we were in a live classroom setting where you delivered a presentation live, because I think that is a key part of developing leadership is communication in a public setting. The better you get at it, the better you will be for leading people. If you're scared, everyone's scared of it. I was scared to death. In my undergraduate program, I went to a university that was for military officer training, and they required public speaking, and I was scared to death to do it, but I knew in every single class you're required to say something. It was the best experience of my life. Even though I hated it back then, it was probably one of the things that helped catapult my career. So for your test, realize it's important to know that personality, when they talk about a personality questionnaire, there's a test on there, a question that's kind of confusing. That's why I want you to write this down. That personality questionnaire results are more objective and reliable than results from behavioral assessments, because it asks what kind of test, and you don't think as a personality questionnaire that's a test, but it is. It says what kind of tests are more objective and reliable than behavioral assessments, and the answer is personality questionnaire. So just need to know that. Developing your own leadership skills. Employers really, again, they highly value individuals with leadership potential and their ability to take initiative and drive important projects, as well as their capacity to develop skills of their team members. So even when I have interviewed and hired hundreds and hundreds of people, that's what I look for. I asked open-ended questions at the beginning, and then sometimes more narrow, but I wanted to get to know them. What are their goals, dreams? What motivates someone? Where do they see them, see yourself in the future? That's how I wanted to see. Also, I'm looking for, are you positive or negative? The secretary or the front desk receptionist probably asked when you were in there waiting for the interview, how was your day? And if it's negative, if you're late, not going to see me for an interview. I'm just telling you, those are negative. Those are red flags that I can't ignore. If they're at their best during an interview. So if they're showing up late or they're constantly saying everything's negative, that's not someone that I would want to hire in an office. So, we look for certain things. You have to know that, of what kind of message you're giving off to other people. So, and also in a job, just make sure you're contributing to the value of the group by doing things on your own without waiting to be told what to do, looking for opportunities and ways to be better. That's what the boss looks for. Looking for someone that has that potential to make a difference and to add value and profitability to the organization's bottom line. That's the one thing they're looking for. So there's some challenges in working with people on developing their leadership skills. And a lot of employers kind of notice a lack of strong leadership skills right now too, with graduating students, even graduate students. That's been a talk in IO psychology, is how can we find good leadership potential, because it seems like we're not hiring the right people. And it's often a lot of students are kind of feeling less confident about their leadership abilities compared to other skills. And a lot of people relate that to the lack of real social interaction in live environments where more things are electronic, gaming in a fake world, virtual world. And so there, all that's new concepts and theories, but the leadership skills, what they claim are for these younger people, are not readily developed through regular schoolwork assignments, and are going to be part of extracurricular, going outside, playing, socializing, working with people. And a lot of kids aren't doing that today, volunteer work. So effective college students, leaders, have found to possess important leadership abilities that are inspiring and committing to a shared vision. Successful leaders understand and work toward embracing the values and their team members. So I want you to think about this and even write it down. Even if it's not on the test, it's something that's going to help you get a job, because these are the questions, that a lot of people that are educated, that are looking for research, they may ask you questions about this, and this is what they're kind of looking for. They want to see if you have a commitment and you're dedicated to shared goals. Have you established shared values that requires input from all the team? How have you worked with complicated situations, and how did you handle failure? They also are looking for if you have an alignment with actions with shared values, meaning if you don't share the same thing, were you able to get on board even though you may not have shared that leader's view? How are you able to overcome that? And they may ask you that, and they're looking for your feedback and see about your self-awareness and realize you don't know it all, that you need it. They were looking for openness, and it's okay to have an opinion, but at the same time, you don't know it all. And that's kind of what they're looking at. That's a crucial role. Even when you're a leader, you still need to realize you don't know everything and you need to ask for input before you make critical decisions. In it, they're looking also for your innovation and how you challenge the status quo. And it doesn't mean that you're challenging leadership. It means that you're not just accepting things, doing it because that's the way we've always done it. You're constantly kind of on the lookout. Can this be improved? Because effective leaders value creativity and innovation. They recognize the need for change when it can lead to improvement, bottom line results. They are continuously questioning existing practices, seeking to understand why things are done in a certain way respectfully, and whether doing things in a different way could be beneficial. But you can't go in trying to change the entire system. Listen first, learn, then you continue to evaluate that situation. And then when the timing is right, provide that input. Also, they want to know how you navigate challenges when you're faced with significant challenges or setbacks. Seeing if you're going to break down these problems in smaller, manageable components to prevent being overwhelmed when all team members are trying to maintain a high level of motivation. Sometimes you have to break it down into small wins. I know that's on the test, which helps build the momentum and support for the change when a company's going through major changes to make sure the team's headed in the right direction. And then embracing your failure and learning, realizing that failure is not a problem. It's not trying that's the problem. But if you're failing, it means you're trying something new, which means as long as you've learned from it, then it can be a good thing. And that's where great leaders understand that, and they allow a safe environment for their team to fail. Very important thing to be an effective leader. You have to allow your people the opportunity to fail without reprimand. So on the test, in the face of failure leaders, it may ask you a question on that. So remember what I just said about how you have optimism, you're resilient, you have a belief in turning things around and things can be better, and you work hard to develop the team and encourage active learning and growth. That's what an effective leader does. So how do you foster strong relationships with and individual talent within those teams? Effective leaders really identify and they know how to enhance group success by nurturing those positive relationships, and a sense of mutual responsibility is being able to explain and describe with the team, not just to say, here is a goal from the company, but why is this goal important? That's what a great leader does. Relates it to the person, relates it to the group, or relates it to the individual to say, this is why for you specifically, this goal should also be meaningful. So when you find meaning in your work, that's the key to getting your team to give their best results, because they see their role as a greater cause. It's not just one thing, a cause for a paycheck. It is to do something special, something with meaning. And recognizing and developing your talent is such an important thing as a leader, is to look for these unique talents of your team and offer effective coaching and mentoring, encourage your people to give them self-confidence and point out what they're doing right. And all too often leaders and even parents are pointing out things people do wrong. What research shows that whatever you point out, that's what they're going to repeat. So if you're constantly telling people what they're doing wrong and you're wondering why they're repeating it, well, research shows people do what you tell them because that's the expectation. So instead, look for things that people do right. Look for things your children one day, if you have children or are going to have children, do right. That's what they're going to repeat to get your approval. So see how this all kind of fits in. That constant feedback is crucial for effective mentoring and looking for the behaviors when they do things right, noticing it, recognizing it, and also in front of other people. Never have negative feedback in front of other people. That should be handled the right way individually, not with text or email, by communication. Positive feedback is different. It could be shattered through the whole organization, could be electronic. It gives praise, recognition for a great job. That's what effective feedback is. And then acknowledging that success. As a great leader doesn't look at someone that's really talented under them as a threat. They look at it as an opportunity to mentor a great person, and they see that as a great partner in the future. That's what a great leader does. And then there's just food for thought. We're way over some time that I wanted to go over, so you can kind of read it and then kind of look at the self-assessment to understand how much you know before you take your test. Please watch this video at least once. Also, I have audio recording of the definitions in D2L. Please go through that, download it on your phone. You can, it's easy to do. to listen to a summary. So next up, it says chapter 13. In this class, we're not going to cover, I don't believe I have that chapter, health psychology, on a test. So I believe we're skipping to 16, 17, and 18. But check your syllabus to make sure. Also in D2L, you can see what our next course is. But I did shorten up some of the information so I could spend more time on these important things like leadership. And of course, chapter 18 is the most fun, most important you'll find about later. So thank you for your time and attention. Until next time, more bad jokes to follow.